Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Information Warfare Pavilion for day 2 of our speaker series and our afternoon sessions. We have 2 sessions this afternoon. For this first one, we're going to a topic that has been on the top of a lot of folks' minds over the last couple of days, and that's the Maritime Operations Center. And how does that fit in with everything that CNO and SecNav and everybody else is saying? And so we have 2 of our great senior leaders to share that with us. Again, as I'm Joe Gradisher, Public Affairs Officer on 206, and one of your hosts for this series over the next few days. We're delighted to have with us Captain Christy Montgomery, who's the Chief of Staff for Naval Information Forces, our Type Commander based in Suffolk. She's from Indiana originally. She's a METOC officer, meteorology and oceanography. She's got a lot of experience at sea, including experience as one of our information warfare commanders afloat, which is in a very important position for us in the information warfare community. And then we have Rear Admiral Susan Breyer-Joyner, who's the Director, Warfighting Integration Director within N2N6, one of her many tours in N2N6. And she's got command tours and experience worldwide. And her bio's online. She's originally from Savannah, Georgia, RPI grad. And with that, I'm going to let them do most of the talking, and I'm going to get out of here so you can hear who you came to see. Ladies and gentlemen, our MOC panel.
Joe, thank you very much for inviting us to do this. And originally, this was going to be 2 separate speakers. And we're like, you know what? There's some relationship between the resource sponsor and the MOC TICOM. Let's do this together. And so we decided to do this. One of the things that Joe didn't highlight, and I would like to, it's one of my favorite tours, is I was one of the first tranches of information warfare commanders before we had a pipeline, before we had training, and just trying to figure out how we were going to make this new construct work. And it's been tremendously gratifying over the past few years to see new information warfare commanders just blow it out of the park with the leadership that they are applying and integrating information warfare afloat. And really, when you look at the Maritime Operations Center, that is truly an extension of what information warfare brings to the Navy, because it is about information, I'm going to say superiority, and I'm going to say that understanding that superiority is not a consistent state of being. It is something that you must fight for. Sometimes you will lose the superiority, but you have to keep persisting to get it. And so information warfare is central to our ability to do that at the Maritime Operations Centers as well as on the strike groups. And over the past few years, the Navy has started recognizing that in a couple of different ways. So when the MOCs were established back in the early 2000s, it was because we needed to reestablish our ability to do command and control at the operational level of war. We had been doing it at the tactical level for a while. We were trying to reinstitute our ability to do it at the operational level, but we did it more of a system of systems approach. And anybody who has worked with systems of systems with no specific architecture or standards understands how then we ended up where we are today, right? So over the past, and I think it may have been about 3 or 4 years ago, the MOC was established as a fleet unit, which you can translate to read warfighting platform. And I highlight that because you hear the MOC talked about as a weapon system. It could be considered that. I like to think of it as a warfighting platform because a warfighting platform supports the optimal use of weapons systems. When you look at the commander's decision cycle and what he or she is expected to do, it is to make optimal use of the weapons systems that have been assigned to their command and control authority, right? And so that's why I refer to it as the warfighting platform. And decision advantage which is something that I've been talking about and working on since I was assigned to the Joint Staff as the Deputy J6 with CJAD C2. It is all about decision advantage. How do we make better decisions faster than the adversary in order to prevail regardless of the situation? That is the charge that we have in order to make the MOCs the most effective warfighting platform that we can for the world's greatest Navy. Just a little bit of a hard job. And so you'll hear about Fight from the MOC from different perspectives. You'll hear about it from the acquisition perspective. You'll hear about it from the MOC TICOM perspective. You'll hear about it from the OPNAV perspective. And to be blunt, about 2 or 3 years ago, there was a little bit of fratricide going on because each one of these initiatives had been started at different times with slightly different visions. And so we've spent the past 2 years going, okay, how do our efforts complement each other so we can work together and accelerate the outcomes that we want to deliver to the warfighting commander? And so it's a tremendous honor to be here with Christy. She's been on this journey for, she got thrown in the deep end when she reported to NAVI-4 and doing the Fight from the MOC. And so those just a few of my opening comments. I'll turn it over to Christy and let her.
Awesome. Thank you, ma'am,
Yep.
for that. Yeah.
Closer. Okay.
Swallow it, Jim. All right. So I think what Admiral Breyer-Joyner said was really critical to understanding why Naval Information Forces is the type command for the MOC, right? And she talked a lot about decision superiority and having a warfighting platform at the operational level of war. And we were thankful enough to partner with N2 N6 a couple of years before the MOC TICOM started and before CNO Franchetti talked about Fight from the MOC and her NAV plan, in recognizing that our C3 commands were also warfighting platforms. And so we established them as warfighting platforms because if you can't communicate, you can't shoot and maneuver, right? And so the similarities between that process and establishing the MOCs as that sort of a node in how you command and control the first and foremost of the 7 joint warfighting functions that a commander uses a MOC warfighting platform to do is to command and control. And so I think NAVI-4 is a rightful place for a TICOM for the MOCs. But that means we get to do all of the really unsexy stuff that TICOMs do. We have to talk about standardizing manning, you know. How do I know if you have enough officers and enlisted to stand up a fire cell? What does that take? CNO in his warfighting instructions talks about being able to be combat surge ready. How do I quantify what it takes to make a MOC combat surge ready? And how many people does that take? And what training and education do those people require so that when they show up to the MOC, maybe not on day 1, but by day 60, they're very effective at warfighting, both from competition all the way to conflict. So manning, training, I just mentioned some of the training, education and training, but we're talking about the operational level of war training. So how do I make sure that I'm helping the commander's decision cycle spin faster, certainly faster than our adversaries? And what does that take to integrate all of the, what used to be called boards, bureaus, cells, and working groups at the operational level of war? But also, how do I make sure that the OS2 understands how to operate the COP and understands all of the different feeds that are coming in and all of the different feeds that are going out? And so there's a complement of individual level training and operational level of war training. We're very blessed to partner with the Naval War College and the Naval Warfighting Development Center, who have been kind of in the MOC operational level of war training game for a while. But the rest of the folks that man the MOCs have just been considered the fleet staff for a very long time. And as Admiral Breyer-Joyner said, they've had 16 years of doing what they want and creating the staffs that they want, molded to what the commanders want, or whatever comes their way based on prioritization in the Navy. And so now how do we try to turn the ship a little bit to get a little bit of standardization so that I know what is required for MOC, but also so I can incentivize assignment, right? I want people to be excited to come to this command and control node for a warfighting commander, understanding the absolute criticality of what they're going to be doing.
And to play on that, so you talked about training, and we've heard a lot of talk about AI. And we know the Secretary of War, speed wins. We need to be AI first, data driven. Sec War is all about getting innovative technology out as quickly as possible, as is CNO. Some of the questions that we're exploring at the OpNav staff, because for those who are not familiar with the Navy, for every advanced degree we support, there's a major area sponsor. And N2N6 was designated as the AI major area sponsor in 2025, so we can start formalizing the education and training track in order to deliver AI-ready forces. And I say that we're talking about civilians, we're talking about officers, we're talking about enlisted, and to a certain extent, we're talking about contractors, because we do have service contractors. And if we don't have a force that is ready to use AI in their daily job, then we are not meeting the CNOs, the SecNavs, or the Secretary of War's intent, right? And so when we talk about that kind of, and it's human-machine teaming. This is not AI coming to replace you as an individual person's job. What various studies and competitions have shown, if you pit machine against man, depending on how complex the scenario is, one or the other is going to win. But if you compete them against a human-machine teaming, the human-machine team has a much higher probability of winning. That's the flexibility, that's the decisive advantage that we want to bring to the table. Because we don't want people to continue. How many folks, if you're in uniform, sure, raise your hand, but how many folks in the audience have previously been in a military service, active duty or reserve? Show of hands. How many of you, keep your hands up, how many of you felt that your time was fully leveraged to your talent and capability, and that you never did any grunge work? Keep your hand up, right? We all had to do things that we didn't want to do because that was the prerequisite to getting to what we wanted to do. AI gives us that opportunity to improve our workflows. It gives us our opportunity to do some advanced analytics and also to begin doing some predictive or prescriptive, probabilistic determinations, right? That's the exciting part about adopting AI and integrating it into the Maritime Operations Center. Because I'm here to tell you, we're finishing up the manpower studies for the MOCs. Those updated numbers are probably going to come out this summer. I don't think we can afford it, right? Because it's a very industrial-based process that says, hey, if you need to get this amount of work done, you need this many people. It doesn't account for the human-machine teaming aspect of it yet. And we've got to figure out how we incorporate that into the calculus, into the calculations as we're developing that AI-ready workforce. So interested in your thought. I'm very passionate about it. I get very excited. Sometimes I suck the oxygen out of the room, but Christy, interested in your thoughts.
Thanks. We partnered with the Navy Manpower and Analysis Center, and this is an organization the Navy's had for over 70 years to study manpower requirements for the Navy. And so their goal is to have a verifiable, trustable, auditable analysis of manpower. But they're going in and they're interviewing folks on how they spend their time doing the work that they're doing. And so their take on the manpower requirements are based on the workload of the sailors and the officers and the civilians currently performing missions in MOCs. And so we aren't at a place yet, and I'm sure everybody's heard at some point somebody say, just put some AI on it, right? Or just sprinkle some AI, like magic fairy dust, right? But we aren't at a place yet where we have been able to figure out how to quantify two things. One, will teaming with machine result in efficiency? And then if it results in efficiency, perhaps will that efficiency be eaten up by the pace that we'll experience in conflict? So I don't want to take manning away from a mock because I'm gaining efficiency by teaming with artificial intelligence. Because in conflict, that human and machine team will have to be faster and funnier, right? They're going to have to do more, and they're going to have to do it faster, and they're going to have to turn in faster decision cycles. And so we're really trying to help NAVMAC and work with OpNav Intuit 6 to make sure that we guard against that. The Navy's really good at coming up with a great plan to save, manning and manpower, and then taking the manpower early, and then the plan devolves, and then now we don't have sailors to do the things that we need to do because they were an efficiency tax, right? So we're trying to make sure that we have the right size for mocks, but be cognizant of the cost of that. Absolutely. Luckily, this year we've seen some great improvements from the leadership in the department of focusing on not capping military manpower growth as we've been capped in the past, and so that's a pretty awesome thing to be thinking about how we allow our military manpower to be right-sized.
All right. So I'm checking the time because I do want to allow time for questions. We are looking forward to that particular conversation. So we've talked about the MOC as a warfighting platform. We've talked about how we man the MOC. The question that folks in the audience, especially those on the industry side, are probably very interested in is, what about the capabilities? What are we doing about the capabilities? I started out by saying that they grew as somewhat of an organic system of systems. They had some common baselines, but it was not standardized. And so in about the 2018 timeframe, we had the first MOC core baseline, mission baseline built. 2023 is the last time it was updated. And so if you're looking around and you think about the technological changes that have occurred between 2023 and 2026, they have been immense. And so one of the things that we're looking at, well, two of the things that we're looking at, one is we've never done a top-level requirements to formally define what the MOC capabilities need to be. We kind of retroactively said, here are the systems that we're using for these different joint warfighting functions, so that's our going in baseline. We're starting from scratch and we're saying, hey, if we need to do the 7 joint functions, what kinds of capabilities, technology agnostic, what kinds of capabilities does the MOC staff need to do? So we're working on that today. Hopefully we'll get it through the R3B sometime this year so we can start moving out on that standardization. But what we also have to do, and what the CNO's charged us with, is to say, how do we establish a standardized baseline without diminishing the commander's ability to innovate? Because he really values the commander's ability to identify those capabilities that they need in order to do their job. We have seen that come through with various tools that either the Joint Force has adopted or specific fleet commanders have adopted, and the Navy's funding them today because the commander said they need them. So how do we more agilely build that into the baseline, and more importantly, how do we identify the capabilities that we need to divest of in order to free up the resourcing for these new capabilities? The additive part is always easy. The making something go away, not so easy. But the CNO is bringing, I think, a level of discipline into the process where if you read his fighting instructions, he talked about committing to investment curves. And what that really does, it's less about the investment and more about the what is being delivered. And here's how much it costs to do that. And he looks at it across multiple fiscal years. Often in the Pentagon, we are planning our budgets in one fit-up. He's asking us for some problem sets, and the MOC may be in this situation, we don't know yet, across 3 fit-ups, which in IW, once you start getting beyond the first fit-up, it's a little bit of imagination and pixie dust. But we're going to make our best guess because we know, if we look historically, emerging technologies occur about, every 2 to 5 years. And there's a cost of adopting and adapting that technology. So we can kind of predict, if we look backwards, we can kind of predict what we're going to need to be able to do in the future, even if we can't specifically say what that transition capability will be. And so that's the kind of work the CNO is asking his staff to do up at the OpNav level, is to think a little bit more deliberately and creatively to not just fix today's problem, but to fix the whole problem and to figure out the timeline along which we can reasonably expect to do that, which I know Admiral Vernasa will be thrilled with, but it still won't be fast enough once we get that into place.
Yeah, and I think if I had a threshold and a stretch objective, it would be threshold is any new capability that comes in the MOC needs to have sailor-centered training to come with it, right? We can't keep getting the widget delivered without an understanding of who's going to operate the widget and how they're going to operate it. And then my objective is make sure it integrates with every other system in the MOC. And I know that's kind of fairy tales and wishes. I spent some time at OpNav in 2 and 6, so I'm familiar with the acquisition process. But we just can't keep doing swivel chair coordination, is what we call it, right? Where I've got a system over here, and then I swivel over here, and I put the thing from my hand jam, the thing from this system into this system, and by that time, our MOC is going to be a smoking crater in the ground. So we've got to find a way to make sure that the baseline, interoperability key performance parameter is actually not ignored and becomes front and center in delivery in the MOC.
Well, and I'm just going to throw out, there's this Department of War standard, modular open systems architecture. One of our favorite terms, right? Because if we get the upfront design right, we won't have non-recurring engineering charges in order to integrate the systems. That does 2 things for us. One, it gets an integrated capability to the warfighter faster. Right? Speed is a thing. Speed wins. It frees up money, so we can spend money not on integrating capabilities that we already have, but on new capabilities that the warfighter needs. Those are 2 critical outcomes that we can measure and that we should measure. And when we talk about artificial intelligence, if any of you attended AI at the Maritime Edge, had Justin Finelli and Admiral Grady a little bit earlier today, you heard him talking about return on investment. Again, AI models, they may have a high ROI when they start, but over time their value diminishes, and so we've got to figure out how and when to divest of that model because a new one has come up with higher ROI. All of this plays into freeing up the scarce dollars that we have to focus them on capabilities that make a difference in making decisions faster.
And the only other thing I would add to that is, I'm staring at a room with a lot of suits in it. So there's a lot of really amazing companies with a lot of amazing products here. And I read on LinkedIn, I think a quote from SecWar that said that, the DOW has kind of been a bad customer. And so I realize that I'm giving you lots of desires and wishes, but we are not great at defining requirements and what exactly it is that we want and what we want it to do and how long we want it do that for. And I think that's one thing that as we start getting better at doing the unsexy TICOM stuff of baselining manning, baselining training, baselining equipping, we're going to be able to get better at understanding the daily TTPs at the operational level of war level so that we can better describe what we're looking for in terms that make sense from a requirements perspective.
All right. Are there any final points you want to make before we open the mics up for questions?
I'm ready for questions.
All right. Joe, how do they ask questions? Where's Joe? Joe left us. Joe left the building. There used to be a microphone. Do we have a mic? Oh, we only have 2 mics. So I'm going to wander the audience. Here we go. I feel like Oprah. Who would like to ask a question?
Thank you, Admiral. Could you just describe your plan or vision for how the reserves will integrate into the MOCs, please?
I'm going to let Christy start. Oh, Forrest? But I want to be Oprah. Here you go.
Thanks for that question. So we had a great engagement with Admiral Blackman, who is at Fleet Forces, and he's run in the reserve forces this small OPT or task force called RC at the OLW, RC Reserve Component at the operational level of war. And what we've been trying to work with the reserve forces doing is that they've spent a lot of time investing in the MAKO series of exercises, which brings reserve forces into the MOCs and allows them to train in different scenarios. And then hopefully that results in them being able to, have things like SIPR tokens on the day of when they arrive, and we don't have to do that RSO and I forever. And so we've learned a lot of lessons from them. We've taken a lot of the effort that they did on defining JQRs for watch standing, and we've adapted those JQRs and put them out to the fleet for wide adoption at the MOCs. We're working with the RPDs to make sure that each of the fleet MOCs has a reserve mobilization plan. We're using the data sets in Jupiter Advana to even think about, if the flag went up, how quickly could the reservist that's assigned to the MOC, UIC, actually make it to the MOC, right? So if I'm a reservist and I am in Idaho, but my MOC that I'm assigned to is in PAC Fleet, can I even make it to PAC Fleet if the fight goes off? So we're trying to we're trying to figure all those things out. So more to follow, but we can't really do this without reserve forces is what we're learning.
Double down on that. But here's a vision. It's a vision. It is not resourced, so it might be a dream. But as we look at adopting new technology, particularly cloud, right? And the ability for that integrated data layer that provides us ubiquitous access regardless of physical location, we have to start thinking differently, I think, about things such as mobilization, COOP, relocation, whatever word you want to use. I think we have an opportunity not just to decentralize command and control, but to decentralize where we are doing it from. Now, there are going to be challenges. Anybody who has tried to work in a distributed environment, there generally tends to be a VTC running 24/7 in order to provide that real-time ability to communicate. As an IP, I've had to maintain that. It's a lot of fun. But as we look at the collaborative capabilities that are built into many of the tools that we are fielding, now you have an ability, whether you are slacking, is it Slack? Yeah, slacking somebody or chatting somebody or fill in your blank of collaborative tool. I've noticed, I'll ask my EA to do something and he's chatting people. And for me, my thing is I want to pick up the phone and talk to somebody, but it's a different generation and a different way of communicating. And and communications, the connectivity is so much more robust and resilient today than it ever has been in the future. And so how do we adopt that new mindset and the technology to think differently about how we're going to do the reserve mobilization, because maybe they don't have to fly from Idaho to Hawaii, although that, if it's not an emergency, it's not a bad trip. But yeah, so I get really excited about the potential there and how we can adopt that.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, questions? Anybody else? Lieutenant?
How are we doing? Good afternoon, ma'am. Lieutenant Washington, I'm the TNOS director for OneNet ME out in Bahrain. My question kind of pertains to two things, right? The system of systems that you spoke about, and specifically to MOC transport, but in a programmatic manner. So right now, a lot of the systems in the MOC, probably a question better for you, ma'am. A lot of the systems in the MOC aren't covered under programmatic support. So is the purview or the viewpoint for the future to kind of keep the system of systems and build a new PMW to kind of govern and handle the life cycle of those systems? Specifically with Fifth Fleet, we have systems that are very specific to the AOR, which fall separately from our other partner nations and stuff. So I just wanted to kind of get your input on that, ma'am.
Yeah, that's a great question. So our goal is to define the core baseline that would be supported programmatically. What that does not yet address are those region-specific, otherwise known as mission build systems, which I am leaning way forward over my skis. Pretend we have Chatham House rules for a minute. Ideally, and I can't sign up for it, but ideally for the mission builds that are necessary for an assigned function by a combatant commander, we have got to figure out a way to bring that into a programmatic support. My first step, though, is to get consistency across the core baseline. And then the second piece will be, okay, how do we formalize the standards for the mission build so we can get them into a programmatic status as well? But that is a historic problem for all of the numbered fleets that have had to purchase out of their current year dollars systems that then the sailors have to figure out how to maintain. So I can't say I feel your pain. I do understand your pain. I haven't been in the fleet a very long time. Pentagon since 2019. I have the badge. But yes, absolutely, there is more work to do there. And please keep elevating that issue to make sure your commander understands and continues to send that demand signal.
And then I just had one more addition to that. The other thing that we're realizing when we as a TICOM go into the MOC and we're like, so what is it you say you have in your comms closet, right? We find out that the fleet bought an installation of link management software or link management server, right? But it wasn't a program of record procurement. And so the program office thinks they're just, fielding, they're successful, they're crushing it. And they were like, but why haven't you updated Fifth Fleet? And they're like, what are you talking about? So I think there's a part of the journey of maturation of the TICOM is trying to distinguish, you have the system, but it wasn't actually a program of record installation. So how do we get that into the proper alignment? So great question.
Good afternoon, John Klein, Johnson Controls. My question for you guys is who is the resource sponsor and what command is responsible for the brick and mortar of the MOC, the mechanical systems and cybersecurity of the operational technology, all the things that make the MOC run? Thank you.
That is a great question. So when we're talking about brick and mortar, unfortunately, that's a little bit where the platform analogy breaks down, right? Because when you're talking about a gray hull, N96 is the resource sponsor for the hull and some of the systems, but not all of the systems, right? And so when we look at some of the acquisition reform that's going on, they're trying to at least group the acquisition programs in a portfolio that's a little bit more cohesive. And then there's a potential OpNav restructuring that should support the SecNav's intent, but we have little visibility into that because the acquisition reform is still going on. But to your question, right now, the building itself and the HVAC and things like that is resourced by N4. The systems internal are resourced by N2 and 6 or N9, depending on the system. A lot of the fire systems are N9 systems, right? So that's part of this journey of how do we align the resourcing in such a way that we can provide wholeness, and that's work left to do. Great question. Yes?
I'm coming.
Do an easy one.
He's ready.
I'll make it. So hi, Linda Newton, former PAC Fleet N6. I do have some comments for you afterwards, but I'm not going to ask the question now. How, as I'm looking at this timeline and lived a large part of that, and we were very much looking at how we were coordinating, somewhat integrating, somewhat leveraging the intelligence community's operations center, both with the Navy side and in PAC Fleet. We were fortunate to work off of the joint, the JIOC there. And you're talking about standardizing, making stuff official through a whole bunch of the different documents. How are you doing that today, both with TICOM and resource sponsor, and potentially leveraging what the intelligence community has done, which on the stuff side, I would put, is ahead of where we are on the operational side. Some of that's related to Title 10 versus Title 50 and the rest of that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Would you like to start? And I will. Okay.
So I think we don't necessarily need every mock to look like every other mock. We just need to know what the requirement is. And each mock may be able to fulfill that requirement in a slightly different way. And there is one unique mock of the 10 fleet mocks, and that is 10th Fleet. So 10th Fleet, Fleet Cyber Command has a lot of unique capabilities for the stuff. And them being a part of that mock network, I think enables a lot of that cohesiveness across the mock platforms for the utilization of those things. But I will say that, intelligence is a joint function, a joint warfighting function. And so at the operational level of war, a strong intelligence operations center is really important. And then doctrinally, the MOC can be the nucleus of a JTF or a JIFMIC. Probably can't hold down two JTFs, or if you're a JTF and a JIF, you have to pick one. But the MOC becomes the nucleus of whatever joint function you're subscribed to. And then a lot of the warfighting capability that 2.6 is looking at and that we are trying to man, train, and equip for are aligned to not only the joint warfighting functions, but thinking about integration in the joint warfighting concept. And so there's still a lot of work to do. I'm not saying the problem, we're totally solved and we're good to go. But I think there's a lot of really positive developments in how we're going to share information, even between Title 10 and Title 50, to make sure that we're fully informed.
And just to put a finer point on it, as we're looking at the MOC systems, it's not just JWICs, it's higher level networks and getting standardized access to all of those networks for all of the MOCs, because the fight continues to move up in classification level. And so that standardization of network classification is important. Where the Intel community is really being helpful is they're doing a lot of applications that we can leverage either via web interface or by integrating it into the Navy's DSIGs platform itself. And so we've started to deploy DSIGs shore nodes So those capabilities that we're integrating from the IC proper are now starting to be available, not just on board the ships, but at the maritime operations centers as well. And so we have a new advocate on the Secretariat staff called the Chief of Naval Intelligence, CNI, and he is very interested in how we leverage what the IC is making available and being a huge advocate for us. And so I imagine that that the Navy's leveraging of Intel, not just products but capabilities, will continue to increase. And then the one final point is, and we can't forget it, it's all about the data, right? And the Intel community is coming up with its own object space model and Mars, and they're doing things which don't fully align with what Department of War is doing, but at least in the Navy, we are tracking them closely because we've got to be able to take what the Intel community is making available to us and figuring out the minimum information that we then need to get out to the afloat units in a contested environment. And so that's work that's still ongoing as well.
Any more questions?
Ma'am, Captain Roger Koopman, current N6 at ComNav AirPac. I think I remember, and you had mentioned data-driven, you'd mentioned decision superiority. Coincidentally, the whole reason knowledge management exists is to enable the decision maker for exactly the right reasons in a military context. If I recall correctly, the original MOC manual had some good write-ups on both information management and knowledge management for the MOC. In middle years, if you will, that seemed to have been taken out. Admittedly, I have not had a chance to look at the very brand new released version, but I'm curious if you got any information on how knowledge management plays into the new MOC manual.
So knowledge management does remain a supporting task. So the new MOC manual aligns to the 7 joint warfighting functions. So the old MOC manual had those 7 functions plus a smattering of others, ended up being 11 total functions. And then each function has several supporting tasks. So when the Warfighting Development Center comes into a MOC and gives them a proficiency assessment, they're looking to see if a MOC can perform the supporting tasks. And under the information warfighting function, knowledge management is still a supporting task, and so there's still a requirement to do that. And there's all sorts of ways that you can do that. And I think what we're all discovering, and Admiral Breyer-Joyner could probably talk a lot more about this, is there's a ton of data that's coming in. It's maybe not curated, it's maybe not stored, and it's certainly difficult to access it at all classification enclaves at a moment's notice for application, for feeding that information into applications, for applications to share from one another. And so in order to support that supporting task, there is capability required to make sure that the knowledge manager isn't just the SharePoint guy, right? And so absolutely is a critical component of making the decision maker more supported.
And I would add that the application of artificial intelligence to knowledge management is a critical enabler in order to keep pace with the flood of data. Because back in the day, right, we just had to worry about documents and Excel spreadsheets, Freudian slip. And so it was a very finite number of formats. Now, when we're talking about big data analytics, we are not just talking about the products that the staff creates. We're talking about operational data that's coming in, intelligence data that's coming in, other sensor data that's coming in, social media data that's coming, right? There are so many different types of data now that the knowledge manager, if that person does not become a master of how to leverage artificial intelligence and understanding the feeds and understanding how you curate that for the boss, I think they're a critical enabler. AI is a critical enabler of them, and they are a critical enabler of AI use on the staff itself. I think that's the future of knowledge management.
I know somebody's got some more questions. Why do I keep leaving and coming back to the same area?
I'll say, if you run out of questions, I have more stuff to talk about. Sorry.
Hi, ma'am. Andy Johnson. I was wondering if you could talk about the coalition partnership and where you see that fitting into this mock modernization effort, I guess. Is that something from the ground up partnership, or, are you looking to get this baseline in order, and then maybe any challenges or strengths that come with that partnership?
I appreciate that. I'm going to let the TICOM speak first, and then I will add in.
It's a great question. Admiral Vernaza often talks about the coalition and our allies and partnerships, and rightfully says that if we go to combat, we're not doing this alone, right? So how do we integrate coalition forces into our MOCs? And then for good reasons, but I'll call it the bureaucracy of foreign disclosure and classification comes in. We talked about needing to have MOCs operate at the highest classification levels. So how do I have my foreign partners on my MOC, but also operate at a special access program level? Those are kind of mutually exclusive right now. And so that's a challenge. But then how do if I have 10 MOC command and control nodes in the United States Navy, what are my coalition counterparts? So I know that the JMSDF is really interested in the MOC concept and thinking about how they do command and control in JMSDF. And so as other nations' navies start thinking about how they're going to do C2 at the operational level of war, I think we're going to have better connectivity and partnership. Maybe not having them on our watch floor for various reasons, but certainly having a connection point for a global, C2 node that we can have that distributed conversation with. But we're still challenged by, as Admiral Breyer Joyner said, mission build. How do we get mission build is oftentimes coalition comms, is what a lot of people don't know. And so I've got to have a certain kind of coalition comms network and a certain AOR so I can talk to the partners and allies in that AOR, but maybe I don't need the same thing in the 5th Fleet AOR that I need in the 7th Fleet AOR. And so what is the common coalition network that all of our allies and partners can plug into with identity management so that they only have access to the things that they're allowed to have access to, and we can understand that and manage that. So hopes and dreams and fairy tale wishes, right? But that's what I would love to see.
Oddly enough, so DISA has just taken over the mission partner environment development for Department of War. They took it over from the Air Force Executive Agent, and the intent is really to provide those kind of enterprise level services to provide a federation of coalition networks. So to your dream, there's at least a target for you to aim at. I think the most important thing as we begin to develop new capabilities is we have to start building them releasable. It's so hard to retroactively make something accessible to partners. And so where we can, for instance, Navy developed an over-the-horizon targeting tool. The first iteration was not REL. The second iteration, we started from REL based on the information sharing agreements that we had in place with the partners. And so as it was being developed, those partners were in the training and getting to test the new capability. And so where we can, I think we need to start not just building joint, but building coalition. I think that's a key part. I also think that it's really important for us to think about how we apply zero trust in a federated environment. Because the thing that we're going to run into, not just between us and the partners, but us and some industry partners and potentially some of our fellow service networks, every network is going to have different levels of zero trust capability. But we're still going to want to share information between those barriers. And so how do we do it securely? That's one of the challenges that the mission partner environment has been charged with, and I think that's been one of their struggles, quite frankly, because it's a large ask. how do you integrate somebody that does username and password and they've got, so some countries have a proliferation of a lot of the same first names and last names. In the Middle East, in China, right? Not that we want China on our networks, but there are countries that the identity is not as unique or as trackable as it is in the United States. And so figuring out how we establish the right zero trust protocols to make sure that we can share information in a secure way, I think is an incredibly important advancement that we need to figure out how to do. That's a great question. Thank you. Other questions?
Good afternoon. In the early days, there was a Maritime Operations Center X, MOC X, that was a clearinghouse for capabilities to come in and be attempted because, out in industry, you're trying to help them, we'll show up at whatever fleet headquarters and push capabilities. And so it was a nice place to be able to bring and test those and build out processes with sailors. Now that was, 15, 18 years ago now, and went away when Second Fleet went away. With the TICOM, is there now a virtual MOC X or other place to build in zero trust, build in cyber resiliency, make it more sailor capable, enable the MOC platform?
No, and I'm not yet. Okay, that's a better positive spin on it. I think I'm learning. So thank you very much for telling me about what used to be. We never invent new ideas as senior leaders. We just rediscover some great idea that somebody else had already invented. So I absolutely would be great. A dev environment, it doesn't even have to be a physical place, but if I found some sort of a cloud-based dev environment where I could set the kind of parameters and conditions for containerization or testing, would be absolutely ideal. So we'll definitely give that to the program office to try to resource.
The program office doesn't resource things. The requirements owner, we don't resource anything either. All right. No, and to that point, while we may not have that MOC X right now, Third Fleet is really acting as somewhat of an incubator for experimentation, Dauntless, in partnership with Dauntless, right? They've been doing a lot of experimentation with capabilities and how they apply to new processes. So while we are waiting for the resourcing of a virtual environment, that may be something that if you're interested in exploring, maybe talk with the MOC TICOM and we can figure out a workaround. Thank you. Other questions? I'm surprised nobody has asked about enhanced mission command framework. So I'm just going to share, for those who may have had the opportunity to hear the CNO speak yesterday as he revealed his fighting instructions or had the opportunity to read the document that he released Monday. I know it has big words and pictures, but it's still a very dense document. There are a lot of concepts that have been thoughtfully arranged in a 25-page document that is going to take us years to execute. That being said, I've fielded the question a couple of times of, hey, does this mean that Fight from the MOC is not as relevant because he talked about the ability to do mission command every day? And I would argue that what he's trying to do is to help people understand the framework within which we have to operate. And what I really love about CNO Cottle is he's a very systems-based thinker. He wants to understand how all of the pieces fit together so he can understand if I turn this dial, here's what's going to happen on this side. And I think that when you talk about mission command and when you talk about centralized C2, because when we first started talking about centralized C2, and by we, I mean Admiral Aquilino, right? He was the first one who really said, hey, I need to be able to command and control from my Maritime Operations Center. He started that when he was Pac Fleet Commander. He took it with him when he was Indo-PACOM Commander. And then doggone it if Admiral Paparo didn't do the same thing, right? And so you have two very different senior leaders in that theater who have said, I need the ability to centrally command and control from my MOC. And there are reasons that they said that. But if you had the opportunity to sit through Sino Cottle's brief yesterday, he showed a graph that said, like, over the past however many years, 90% of our activity is in competition, maybe some crisis, and like 10% is the high end. And so I think a very valid point to take away is in the 10%, I'm probably going to need to be able to do some centralized command and control just because of who has accessibility to the exquisite information that's going to inform my threat calculus and my targeting. But 90% of the time, we still have to be able to execute mission command, right? So that's the basic going in premise that I think he's just trying to reset the playing board. But then he takes it one step further. And the first time I heard this, because he kind of mentioned it as an aside in a meeting, I'm like, autonomous, what are you talking about? Right? And so what he's talking about is taking it a step further. And this goes to, and I had to Google this word when I heard it, holacracy, right? And I can't even make it an adjective. But that approach, that ability to decentralize, to move away from a hierarchical to a decentralized command and control structure that's based on defined roles that include both your tactical situation, the acceptable level of risk, your proficiency, your battle space awareness, all of those factors play in together to determine what can be autonomously delegated. And so this is providing a framework, a system for us to start making much more commanders to make much more nuanced decisions about what they're going to delegate to who. And so I continue to learn so much. I really do every time CNO talks. But he has thought deeply about these things when he was Fleet Forces Command and even before. And now he's helping bring everybody else along by describing the system that he thinks in. And so I'm really excited about the potential for enhanced mission-based command, because when we start to talk about operational command and control centers, most of us think about the 3 stars and the 4 stars. Well, but CSGs have operational command centers. NICTAMs have operational command centers. We have different operational command centers. And so what are their roles? What decisions are they delegated? How do they fit into the broader whole? As we look at everything that a commander needs to do in order to command and control in a resilient and non-geographically bound manner. And I mean physical, where I sit. So that's a lot of fun.
And on that, I think from the TICOM perspective, that framework also allows us to get real about how we resource things. You could probably spend infinite amounts of dollars trying to push exquisite situational awareness down to the tactical firing unit and still not succeed. And so if I have a better way to invest the dollars in certain warfighting scenarios at a MOC, and then only delegate mission command to the unit that has the same shared situational awareness, then I'm better utilizing the resources that I have, investing in that exquisite capability at the right operational level. And it feels uncomfortable because you may be asking a firing unit to do something that in some cases they don't have the situational awareness that's shared at the MOC. But understanding how that orchestration happens at a MOC level and why you're asking that unit to be in this certain position at a certain time to take a certain shot. That unit may not understand that, and so there's going to be a little bit of a trust aspect to, I think, Mission Command as well that's going to be really important for executing this from the MOC.
Ladies and gentlemen, that ends our session with our two great panelists here. Thank you very much, ladies. We're going to go right into our next session. So as they depart the stage, I know people want to come up and hand the business cards to them. If we could ask them to go towards the back, and we'll set things up real quickly for our next speaker, because we know we have limited time before the show closes for the day.